For 1,000 years, the galaxy had been drenched in blood. The Dominion of Action, an empire built on iron-fisted control, waged an unrelenting war against the Valkyrie swarm, a nightmare of chitin and hunger. Planets fell. Civilizations were erased. Armies were ground into dust, their bones buried beneath the ruins of a war no one remembered starting. Every species that had dared to rise was crushed beneath the weight of these two titanic forces. There was no neutrality, no peace. There was only the eternal war. Then humanity arrived. They were nothing at first, a species too young, too reckless, too insignificant to be worth exterminating. The Dominion saw them as a minor nuisance, a rebellious upstart barely worth deploying a fleet. The Valkyrie saw them as little more than flesh to be consumed and repurposed. But humanity was something new, something terrifying. They did not fight like the others. They did not line up in great formations or wage war according to ancient doctrines. When the Dominion attacked, their fleets found themselves lured into gravity wells, their capital ships vanishing as if the void itself had swallowed them. When the Valkyrie descended, expecting easy prey, their queens died screaming as bioweapons turned their own hive instincts against them. And at the center of it all were the Phantom Kings. No one knew who they truly were. No names, no faces, only code names whispered like myths across battlefields. Strategists who could dismantle entire warfronts without ever revealing their presence. Warriors who fought like ghosts, appearing where they were least expected and vanishing before retaliation could come. The Dominion feared them. The Valkyrie hated them. But most of all, they could not stop them. The first time the galaxy understood what humanity had become, it was at the fall of Geron IV. The Dominion had sent a fleet of 1,000 warships to crush the Terran colonies there, backed by planetary siege platforms that could glass continents in hours. The outcome should have been inevitable. Instead, the fleet was torn apart in a single night. Sensors picked up nothing but distortions in the void. Communications fell silent one by one, each ship reporting only a flicker of movement before vanishing. The Dominion's commanders scrambled for answers, but by dawn, the entire armada was gone. No wreckage, no distress calls, only empty space where the greatest war fleet in Dominion history had once stood. The survivors, what few there were, spoke of impossible things. An enemy that did not fight conventionally. Warships that seemed to emerge from the darkness itself, striking before sensors could even register them. Dominion battlecruisers that simply disappeared, as if reality itself had folded around them. It was the first time the Dominion whispered the name of the enemy that haunted them. The Phantom Kings had arrived. And the eternal war would never be the same. The Dominion reeled. The loss of Geron IV wasn't just a defeat. It was an unraveling. 1,000-ship fleet, annihilated without a trace. Entire war doctrines, obsolete overnight. Panic spread through the highest ranks of the Immortal Council. For the first time in centuries, they feared an enemy they couldn't understand. But while the Dominion hesitated, the Valkyrie saw opportunity. With their relentless hunger, the insectoid war hive descended upon the crippled Dominion sectors, eager to consume what remained. Millions of chidness horrors surged through the void, tearing into damaged fleets, overwhelming planets that had lost their protectors. This was how it had always been. An endless cycle of destruction, a balance of terror that neither side could break. But something was different now. The Valkyrie expected easy slaughter when they struck the Orion Line, a cluster of human-held colonies on the Dominion's warfront. Their bioships rained from the sky, releasing waves of bone-armored monstrosities. Cities were overrun in hours. But as the swarm reached the core settlements, something changed. Their queens screamed through the hive mind as their drones began convulsing, their genetic code unraveling in real time. The ground forces collapsed, their bodies dissolving into pools of unstable biomass. The bioships, once a seamless extension of the swarm, turned on each other, firing organic artillery at their own kind. It was a trap. Human scientists had cracked the Valkyrie genome, crafting a virus that disrupted their hive cohesion. With a single release, the coordinated swarm became a mindless, writhing mass. Within hours, the invasion force had torn itself apart. And then the Phantom Kings arrived. They did not come in grand fleets. They did not deploy endless ranks of troops. They came as shadows in the dark, striking with terrifying precision. One moment, the Dominion's remaining forces were fending off a Valkyrie incursion. The next, their command ships imploded, entire admirals erased by sniper fire from unseen positions. The Dominion had believed themselves safe behind their automated defenses, but the Phantom Kings moved as if the galaxy itself bent to their will. The Valkyrie's most powerful war queen, Sherika, watched in horror as her remaining forces were systematically dismantled. She had always known how the Dominion fought: blunt, predictable, slow. But this was something else. This was warfare evolved. Then, her ship's sensors detected something impossible. The void itself was bending. Ships moving through folds in space where no known technology should allow them. Not warp drives. Not hyperspace lanes. Something different. And then, her fleet began vanishing, one vessel at a time. The Valkyrie did not retreat. They had no word for it. Their species had never needed one. But this time, they ran. The Dominion, still reeling from their own losses, could barely comprehend what had happened. Their enemies had fought each other for 1,000 years. The balance had always held. And yet, in mere days, humanity had shattered the equilibrium. The Phantom Kings had turned the eternal war into their hunting ground. And the galaxy was beginning to understand what that meant. The Dominion's ruling elite, the Immortal Council, convened in secret. Their chamber, an obsidian construct orbiting a dying star, had stood untouched for centuries. No enemy had ever forced them into such an urgent assembly, until now. The reports were staggering. The Dominion's greatest fleets were disappearing into the void without a trace. Entire planetary defenses had been breached by an enemy that moved unseen. The Phantom Kings weren't just winning battles, they were dismantling the very foundation of the Dominion's war machine. "They should be nothing," growled Supreme Chancellor Orvin, his voice tight with rage. "Humans, a species barely a century into the stars, and yet they strike at us like they have been here since the dawn of war itself." The Council's war strategist, an ancient being named Cyril, leaned forward. "It is not their numbers, not their fleets. It is them. These Phantom Kings." The name was spoken with uncharacteristic hesitation. The Dominion did not fear, and yet something about these warlords was unnatural. They fight without pattern. They think differently. If we cannot predict them, we cannot defeat them. Orvin exhaled slowly. "Then we force them to fight like us." His plan was brutal. The Dominion would not chase shadows. Instead, they would strike where humanity was weakest, its heart. The core worlds, Earth, the cradle of their kind. If the Phantom Kings were gods of war, then the Dominion would force them to defend something mortal. And when they did, they would be broken. The order was given. A Dominion Titan-class war fleet, the Imperium Rex, was dispatched to burn Earth to cinders, a fleet large enough to end the human species in a single blow. But it never arrived. For 3 days, the fleet transmitted normally. Then, without warning, all signals ceased. Every vessel, every warship, every soldier aboard, gone. No distress calls, no debris, just an empty void where 1,000-strong armada had once been. The Dominion's intelligence networks went into a frenzy. Had the Valkyrie struck? No. The swarm was still reeling from its genetic collapse. Had some internal failure occurred? Impossible. The Titan fleets were the most advanced in Dominion history. That left only one answer. The Phantom Kings had done something no power in the galaxy had ever achieved. They had erased an entire Dominion Titan fleet without leaving a trace. The Immortal Council did something they had never done before. They hesitated. Meanwhile, on the shattered front lines of the Eternal War, The Valkyrie struggled to comprehend their new reality. The Phantom Kings had turned their own evolution against them, splintering their once unified swarm into chaos. Rogue queens warred against each other, each seeking dominance over the broken remnants of their empire. And in the darkest corners of the Valkyrie hive mind, Queen Sherika reached a decision that had never before been made in the history of her kind. She would not fight humanity. She would surrender to it. And in doing so, she would change the course of the war forever. Panic gripped the Immortal Council. The Imperium Rex was gone. A Titan-class war fleet, an armada powerful enough to turn entire planets into scorched husks, had simply vanished without a trace. No battle records, no distress calls, not even wreckage. This was not war as the Dominion understood it. This was something else. Something worse. They have rewritten the rules of engagement. Cyril whispered, his voice unsteady. We cannot fight what we cannot predict. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion's confidence cracked. Their war doctrines had stood unchallenged for millennia. Yet, in mere weeks, humanity had shattered them. Chancellor Orvin, his metallic fingers digging into the armrest of his throne, made his decision. Deploy the Titan Protocol. The room fell silent. Even the war-hardened strategists exchanged uncertain glances. The Titan Protocol was the Dominion's last resort, a project buried so deep in secrecy that not even its creators had lived to see its completion. It was a fleet unlike any before it, built for one purpose: to erase entire civilizations from history. But even before the fleet could be mobilized, the Phantom Kings struck again. This time, they did not attack a war front. They struck at the Dominion's heart, the capital world of Action Prime. The untouchable throne of the Empire went dark. Every planetary defense, every orbital sensor, every transmission, silent. In a single night, the greatest fortress world in Dominion history had been severed from the galaxy. The Council's horror deepened when the first images leaked through from Action Prime's surface. The once impenetrable Citadel cities now stood in eerie silence. No signs of battle, no bodies, no blood. Only the empty husks of warships left to drift in orbit, their crews missing. It was as if the Phantom Kings had simply removed the Dominion's presence from the planet, without ever firing a shot. The Dominion's confidence turned to terror. Meanwhile, the Valkyrie swarm, what remained of it, faced its own reckoning. The genetic virus humanity had unleashed was still ravaging their kind. Queens turned against queens. Their empire, once a single ravenous force, had splintered into civil war. But amidst the chaos, Queen Sherika had done the unthinkable. She had sent a signal directly to the Phantom Kings. No queen had ever attempted diplomacy. The concept itself was alien to the swarm. The Valkyrie did not negotiate. They conquered. But Sherika had seen what no other queen had. The humans were not merely another species to devour. They were something else, something worse. And so she did what no Valkyrie had ever done. She begged for an audience. For days, no response came. The silence was suffocating. Then, without warning, her ship's navigation locked onto a new destination, a set of coordinates leading into the black void, where no stars burned. The Phantom Kings had answered, and whatever awaited her at those coordinates would decide the fate of the eternal war. The Valkyrie War Queen Sherika had never known fear. Her species did not feel in the way lesser creatures did. The swarm consumed, expanded, and evolved. That was the law of the universe. But as her biocruiser approached the designated coordinates, she felt something foreign slithering through her hive mind, a thing her kind had never truly experienced: uncertainty. The void ahead was empty. No stars, no planets, no debris. And yet, her ship's sensors registered something there, something vast, hidden just beyond the reach of understanding. A fortress, a fleet, a world. The more she tried to comprehend it, the more her mind recoiled. Then, without warning, reality itself seemed to bend. A tear in the darkness unfolded before her, and from it emerged a presence. Not a voice, not a form, just a presence, vast and unknowable. A phantom king had arrived. "We accept your surrender." The voice came, not through sound, but through her mind itself. It was not a question. It was a statement of absolute fact. Sherika bristled. The concept of surrender was foreign to her. The swarm did not submit. And yet here she was, kneeling before a force that had broken the laws of war, a force that had dismantled the Dominion's fleets without firing a single shot. "I do not surrender," she replied, her voice a psychic ripple across the void. "I evolve." For a long moment, silence reigned. Then the Phantom King spoke again. "Then you are useful." Her ship's systems flickered as new coordinates were burned into its navigation. Sherika knew there was no turning back now. Whatever humanity truly was, whatever they were, she was about to face it. Across the galaxy, the Dominion was spiraling into madness. The loss of Action Prime had shattered the illusion of their invulnerability. The war machine that had crushed empires for 1,000 years was now paralyzed by fear. They had never not been in control. And now, they understood what it meant to be prey. But Chancellor Orvin was not a man who allowed fear to dictate his fate. With his advisors paralyzed by indecision, he activated the Titan Protocol himself. From the shadowed depths of Dominion space, the Titan-class warships stirred. These were not mere battleships. They were world killers, dreadnoughts outfitted with planet-breaking weaponry, each the size of a small moon. Their purpose was not conquest, it was extinction. One by one, the Titans powered up. Their first target, Earth. And yet, even as they prepared for war, something impossible happened. The first Titan, the vengeance of Action, simply vanished. Orvin watched in horror as it disappeared from the Dominion sensors, as if it had never existed. No explosion, no debris, just gone. Then the second Titan vanished. Then the third. Panic spread through the Dominion's high command as the Titans, their last and greatest weapons, were erased from existence. Some whispered that it was humanity's doing. Others believed it was something far worse. Orvin clenched his fists as the terrifying realization sank in. The Dominion was no longer fighting a war. It was being hunted. Serika's biocruiser drifted into the abyss, swallowed by an expanse of darkness unlike anything she had encountered. This was not empty space. It was something else. Her ship's senses reached out, scanning. The data returned was impossible. The void itself was moving, shifting, as if it were alive. Structures flickered in and out of existence, impossibly vast constructs that should not be, wrapped in folds of space-time that defied the laws of physics. Then she saw them, the Phantom Kings. Not just one, many. Their warships, if they could even be called that, were unlike anything in the known galaxy. They had no fixed form, no standard design. They were shadows in motion, shifting between dimensions like predators, flipping through the cracks of reality itself. Every time she tried to focus on one, it seemed to exist in multiple places at once. Then a voice, cold, absolute, echoed through her hive mind. "You wish to understand." Sherika did not hesitate. "I wish to survive." And so, the Phantom Kings showed her the truth. She felt the knowledge pour into her mind, visions that should not exist, histories that no species had ever uncovered. The war between the Dominion and the Valkyrie swarm had never been natural. It had never been about survival or conquest. It had been engineered. Something ancient lurked beneath the surface of the eternal war, a force neither mechanical nor biological, neither conqueror nor victim. It had no name, no face. It had only a purpose. It fed on war itself. For millennia, it had shaped the fate of the galaxy from the shadows, ensuring that no empire ever truly won. The Dominion and the Valkyrie had been its greatest tools, manipulated into conflict so that the war would never end. The suffering, the destruction, the endless cycle of death, That was the true resource. It was not a single entity. It was a construct of war itself, a vast intelligence formed from the minds of every warlord, conqueror, and strategist who had ever fought in the eternal war. It did not seek to win. It sought only to continue. Sharika recoiled from the truth. Her kind had believed themselves the pinnacle of evolution, a force of nature that consumed all in its path. But they had never been in control. Neither had the Dominion. Both had been nothing more than fuel. She turned her mind back to the Phantom Kings and humanity. For the first time, she felt something strange from the presence before her, a sense of grim satisfaction. We were not part of the design. The revelation sent a ripple of unease through her hive mind. Humanity was not meant to be here. Their rise had been unexpected. They were an anomaly, one the great intelligence had failed to predict. And because of that, they had broken the cycle. The eternal war was not eternal anymore. It was about to end, and the architects of war would do everything in their power to stop that from happening. The truth changed everything. Sharika, once a queen of the Valkyrie swarm, now understood the horror that had governed the galaxy for 1,000 years. The war had never been a clash of empires, never a battle for dominance. It had been a construct, a carefully maintained machine designed to perpetuate suffering and destruction. And humanity. Humanity was the flaw in the machine. The Phantom Kings had uncovered this truth long ago. They had fought not for survival, nor for power, but to break the cycle, to destroy the intelligence that fed on the galaxy's suffering. Now, it was time for the final strike. Across the shattered front lines of the war, an impossible alliance began to form. The Phantom Kings, spectral masters of unseen warfare. The Valkyrie, no longer a unified swarm, but an evolving force seeking freedom from manipulation. Even fragments of the Dominion, warlords who had realized they, too, had been nothing more than pawns. It was not a war for territory, not a war for survival. It was a war against war itself. The target, the Void Throne. The Phantom Kings had tracked the source of the great intelligence to a dead system beyond the galactic core, a world swallowed in absolute darkness, where no signals had ever escaped. It was no planet, no structure. It was something far worse. A mind, a gestalt consciousness forged from centuries of conflict, residing in the space between dimensions. The Dominion and the Valkyrie had never discovered it because they had never been meant to. It had shaped their evolution, twisted their civilizations, ensuring they would never rise beyond a state of endless war. But the Phantom Kings had found it. And now, they were coming for it. The fleet assembled in the void, not in great numbers, for numbers did not matter in this battle. The Phantom Kings did not fight wars of attrition. They fought with precision. A single strike, a decapitation. The Dominion's remnants unleashed their remaining dreadnoughts, their commanders filled with a bitter fury at having been manipulated for generations. The Valkyrie, once mindless conquerors, now acted with purpose, their evolutionary instincts bending toward survival on their own terms. And humanity. They were the unknown, the force that should not exist, the variable the intelligence had never foreseen. The warships moved. The Void Throne awakened. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the architects of war realized they had made a mistake. They had underestimated the one species that did not fight for conquest, nor hunger, nor dominance. They had underestimated humans. The final battle had begun. The Phantom Kings led the charge. Their fleet did not warp into the system in the traditional sense. There were no hyperspace lanes, no gravitational disturbances, no alerts for the enemy to detect. One moment, the Void Throne stood in silence. The next, they were already there. The war machine, the intelligence that had fed on suffering for millennia, reacted instantly. Defense fleets materialized from the darkness, vast constructs of metal and living matter, amalgamations of every species it had ever manipulated. The remnants of forgotten empires, ships that had never been destroyed but merely taken, were thrown forward as a last line of defense. It did not matter. The Phantom Kings did not fight conventionally. They slipped through folds of space, striking at the heart of the enemy fleet with weapons that should not exist. Dominion warlords, now free of their unseen shackles, unleashed their Titan-class battleships. Valkyrie bioships, once mindless drones, moved with terrifying purpose, adapting in real time to counter the enemy's tactics. Humanity had taught them how to be unpredictable. But the Void Throne was not just a battlefield. It was a living mind. As the attack raged, it shifted reality itself, creating anomalies that shattered causality. Entire warships aged into dust in seconds. Others found themselves repeating the same moment over and over, trapped in a cycle of endless destruction. It tried to turn the battle into another eternal war. But the Phantom Kings had come prepared. They did not need to fight a prolonged war. They needed one strike. And so, while the fleets raged, the true warriors made their move. The best of humanity, the unseen masters of this conflict, infiltrated the heart of the Void Throne. They moved through spaces that did not exist, bypassing defenses not with brute force, but with absolute understanding of their enemy. At the center, they found it. The mind. It was not a machine. It was not alive. It was something between. A vast, self-sustaining intelligence woven from the collective consciousness of every warlord, conqueror, and strategist who had ever participated in the eternal war. It did not think as individuals did. It calculated. And for the first time, it faced an equation it could not solve. Humanity had not been part of its design. And now, humanity had come to erase it. With surgical precision, the Phantom Kings unleashed a weapon unlike any before. Not a bomb, not an EMP. An idea, a self-replicating construct of thought, something even the intelligence could not counteract. A paradox, an understanding of peace so fundamentally incompatible with its existence that it began to unravel itself. The intelligence screamed. Across the galaxy, the war fronts collapsed. Dominion fleets stood down, their orders severed. The Valkyrie swarm, once bound to endless hunger, suddenly found themselves free. The great machine of war, the force that had shaped history, was dying. And then it was gone. The silence that followed was deeper than space itself. For the first time in 1,000 years, there was no war. The eternal war was over. And the Phantom Kings, they vanished. Their mission was complete.